Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to this round table at the IASEI, the Institute for National Security Studies. I need to begin with a word of explanation on the rationale behind the decision to hold the round table at the IASEI, because usually those who follow our work know that this is the question of anti-Semitism is not on our agenda, and secondly, not high on our agenda. There are other more qualified centers and institutes in Israel which excel in the research of this phenomena. We deal at the IASEI with the general EU-Israel relations, with the political, the economic aspects. But about a year ago, we started a cooperation with the Tel Aviv University and Jerusalem University, and giving a course on the practical aspects of the relationship between the EU and Israel. And of course, sooner or later, we reached the subject of movements in Europe which re-emerged, nationalistic movements with xenophobic, racial agendas and ideologies. And we decided that we need to deal with it not only in the context of the course, but also to open it to the public and have a discussion on the various aspects of this phenomena in Europe, and I have to add in Israel as well. And we find ourselves in a situation where Israel and the EU have to deal with, on the multilateral, on the bilateral, on the various levels with this phenomena, this question of movements, as I said, espousing ideologies which not only border but are racial and xenophobic and anti-Semitic in many cases. These are no more fringe groups. They are becoming central in some of the European countries. It's not a Jewish issue anymore. And when we both, Europe and Israel, go through our internal political process, as we know, we are going to elections, Europe is going to elections, there will be new leaders of the various institutions of the EU at the end of the year. When we go through this process, we will have, both the EU and Israel will have to discuss at the highest political level with candor, with courage, and with a commitment to deal with the aspects that we are going to discuss this afternoon. With me this afternoon are two partners, and I would like to introduce them as words of thanks, first of all, to the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. Micky is the representative this afternoon of this Stiftung, with whom we have a very fruitful cooperation, and we thank you for the contribution to this event, and to Dr. Maya Sion-Tzidkiyahu. She is the president. I knew that I won't be able to remember this old title, the Israeli Association for the Study of European Integration. Here I did say it without even a single mistake. No, but you are very energetic in the pursuit of the study and the promotion of the EU-Israeli relations on the academic level, teaching at the Tel Aviv University. And so, Micky, please.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Dear Oded Eran, dear Maya, Sion, dear Herzog, Chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel, ambassadors, colleagues and friends, we are now in the 7th year of excellent cooperation with the Association for the Study of European Integration. Thank you, Maya, for this great partnership between us. The aim of this series is to assist in promoting the understanding of European integration and Europe among academics, governmental officials, and the wider public in Israel. We hold the events in leading university, academic colleagues, and institutions like this one, the IASEI, with the aim to facilitate exchanges of decision makers and experts, thus introducing each other's viewpoints into the public discourse. Together we choose relevant topics like the one we are discussing today. One of the strategic targets of the FAS work in Israel is strengthening Israeli-European alliances and disseminating information about the EU and Israel and vice versa. This is very important since Israeli-European relations are complex and ambivalent. We try to introduce European viewpoints into the Israeli discourse and Israeli viewpoints into the European one. Now some words about today's challenging topic. The rising anti-Semitism in Europe, regardless of whether it comes from the right or the left of the political spectrum, is appalling and needs to be fought by all means available. This also includes the blind hatred against the State of Israel. Anti-Zionism is nothing but a modern form of anti-Semitism because it negates the Jewish people their fundamental right to collectively take its destiny into its own hands, which other peoples in the world are usually allowed to do. Therefore, at least in my opinion, it is not enough to only recognize Israel's right to exist, but rather to recognize it explicitly as the Jewish state. This has been done already, for example, in the coalition treaty of the current CDU-SPD coalition government in Germany. A recent study commissioned by the Austrian parliament revealed a core of 10% of the Austrian population holding anti-Semitic views. The good news is that the younger and better educated the population, the more resistant they are when it comes to hatred against Jews. Yet, the bad news is that around 70% of the Arab-speaking population and 50% of the Turkish-speaking population support the claim that once the State of Israel ceases to exist, there will be peace in the Middle East. This is alarming and a pan-European challenge to overcome. It also shows that the following definition of anti-Semitism, as formulated by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, stands correct. And it says, anti-Semitism is denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavor and applying double standards by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. The FAS sees itself in Germany and in the rest of Europe on the forefront in the fight against anti-Semitism. At the same time, we advocate for a European-Israeli alliance and a deepening of bilateral relations on all levels. That is the moral and just thing to do, and it is a thorn in the side of all anti-Semites. I wish us a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Micky, and thank you, Oded. Dear honorable speakers, Mr. Herzog, Ms. von Schnurbein, you don't hear me well? It's better this way. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm very, very happy to see this big crowd, big audience here. And good afternoon, Mr. Herzog, Ms. von Schnurbein, Ambassador Geoffrey, and dear ambassadors and guests. The topic of today's event, dealing with anti-Semitism, is, as Oded said, not a topic that the Israeli Association for the Study of European Integration is usually dealing with. The association holds seminars and conferences on the advancement and downturns of the European integration process and on EU-Israeli relations. And the EU is an inspiring project of peace building, of removing not only economic barriers between countries, but also aspiring to remove old human barriers stemming from fear, stereotypes, and hatred. The last decade was not an easy one for the European Union. In the past years, our association held events dealing with one EU crisis after the other. So it was the debt crisis, then it was the immigration crisis, it was followed by a Brexit crisis and the rise of populist and extreme parties, political parties, both on the left, but mainly on the right side of the political spectrum. These two recent crises, the Brexit and the rise of populist and extreme right-wing parties, were a by-effect of the economic and immigration crisis. And to my belief, the rise of anti-Semitism and increase in hate crimes toward the Jewish population in the European Union, it's not just the Jewish population, but we're focusing on this one, is also a by-effect of the economic, social, identity, and ideational changes and effects of those crises. Some of the European Union crises were turned into an opportunity for reform and change. So never waste a good crisis, right? That's a revived motto of EU leaders and our ambassador to the EU. And I think the EU should not sort of waste this really bad outbreak of anti-Semitism in the member states of the European Union and press forward what has been its internal normative power. The EU should strengthen its projection of values that it stands for: the eradication of racism, intolerance, prejudice of the other, the respect for human dignity, the respect for freedom of religion, which are part and parcel of the fight against anti-Semitism. The EU was created in the 1950s to benefit its member states, giving them the advantages of economies of scale. The bigger the union is, the more advantages of efficiency it allows for its member states, aiming to raise levels of prosperity and freedoms. The European Union's advantage of its scale can and should also be used to fight anti-Semitism, to promote cohesive and effective data gathering, monitoring, and the spread of best practice that countries have in the fight of anti-Semitism. There should not be a gap between its hard rhetoric against anti-Semitism and its actions. So actions should follow the rhetorics of the EU. Until recent years, the European Union did not see anti-Semitism as a challenge under its competence. Yet the rise of terror attacks directed to Jews and the increase of hate crimes related to anti-Semitism changed this perspective. Since 2015, the European Commission nominated Ms. Katrina von Schnurbein as a coordinator of combating anti-Semitism, and I'm very happy you were able to be with us today, and we're looking forward to hear you. In 2017, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on combating anti-Semitism. These are just two mere examples of the rhetorics and deeds that the EU has done to promote the fight of anti-Semitism, and there are numerous other examples. I'm not sure they reached far enough as Israel maybe would have liked to, but that we will discuss later. Among other things, the European Union can contribute to this end by improving its relations with the State of Israel. Anti-Israeli incitement is one of the causes of the new anti-Semitism. Not every criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, but for the new anti-Semitism, this does not make a difference. The EU should be very clear that international developments or political issues, including those in Israel or elsewhere in the Middle East, never justify anti-Semitism. In this respect, the EU-Israeli relations are uneasy. They used to be very advanced until the EU linked their upgrade with the advancements of the peace process with the Palestinians. And this linkage is unprecedented in EU foreign relations, with all the criticism that one may have on the government of Israel. Still, there is, this linkage is unprecedented, and I think it should be revised. I would like to thank Dr. Oded Eran, head of the European program at the IASEI, and to the research fellow with him supporting and conducting the backstage of this event, Adi Cantor and Adi Novak. Also to thank our joint partner, the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, Mr. Micky for supporting this event, and to thank the director, Paul Pasch, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. I wish you a frank and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Before introducing our keynote speaker, I just want to add my thanks to the two Adis from the Institute, Adi Cantor, who will chair the second panel, Adi Novak, and Margot Nekak. Do I spell it correct? Pronounce it correctly? An intern from in the Institute from Holland. To our keynote speaker, Mr. Isaac Herzog, the chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency for Israel. When you retired from political life in Israel, if one can retire from such a situation, and when you became the chairman of the Jewish Agency, the Israeli politics lost a very influential political leader, but the Jewish people won a very talented, distinguished, energetic chairman. And I think that, I'm not so sure about the Israeli politics, but the Jewish people won a very significant asset to our partnership between diaspora and Israel. Now, when in government you held several posts, ministerial posts, but I will mention only one which is very relevant. You were the Minister for Diaspora and Combating Anti-Semitism, so I know of no one who is more qualified to speak about the subject this afternoon. Please.
Okay, good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. You still prefer with the speaker? I think it's okay. So I'm very honored to be here, and in this very distinguished premise of the INSS, I want to thank the President of the Institute, General Amos Yadlin, my friend. I want to thank you, Ambassador Oded Eran, who we have worked with for many years, and of course, the supporters of this wonderful and important event, both the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, an organization which I know for many years as in my days as leader of the Labour Party. Thank you, Micky, and to Dr. Sion on behalf of the IASEI. Okay, and I welcome you, dear ambassadors, Ambassador of the EU, Mr. Geoffrey, and of course, Madam von Schnurbein. I'll be meeting you as well on this important topic. So I'll actually start with speaking about a worldwide phenomenon. Anti-Semitism in the rise is not only a European phenomenon. It is an issue that we see all over the world. United States, for one, there have been recent events, and not only Pittsburgh, but even the political debate that we are seeing in the last few days has been contaminated with streaks of anti-Semitism. Argentina, the recent attack on the chief rabbi of Argentina has shed light on a phenomena which is well known to us in the Jewish Agency of increased events of anti-Semitism. And there are many countries as well that are suffering from this horrific virus which has plagued humanity for millennials. So why is it happening now? How come that this era is one of the darkest eras as it pertains to anti-Semitism in recent times, in the last generation? How come there's such a sharp rise that the Prime Minister of France says there's 69% increase in anti-Semitic attacks in France? Or that we are seeing the British Labour Party being plagued by enormous issues of anti-Semitism, so much so that the chairperson of the Labour Friends of Israel, which is the pro-Israel caucus in the British Parliament, Joan Ryan, has recently quit from the Labour Party, and I just had a joint appearance with her 2 days ago, and she got up and said it's deeply rooted in the Labour Party, one of the pillars of British democracy. Or how come we are seeing a poll by CNN Europe with 7,000 Europeans, 30% of them saying we have no clue about what the Holocaust was all about, 50% blaming the Jews for the situation that has beridden them, and so forth and so on. Where does this come from? And I think, of course, that it comes from an era of change in human behaviors in public life and human behavior as such. So I quote from Steve Bannon, who in interviews claimed basically that the world order of post-World War II for the last 70-odd years, whereby humanity restrained itself from being animalistic or vicious, is gone. And we are back to being animals in the jungle. Basically, I would say it in rough words. And that, and we can see it in the way the world order has collapsed in Syria, and we can see it in the way world order has been treating the incoming new immigrants in Europe or in the United States, and so forth and so on. Couple it with politics which are extremely personal, aggressive, and low common denominator, and you live in a different era. And we know exactly what we're talking about because we are in this very deep, all of us as human beings who care about what's going on in the world. But for me, the issue of anti-Semitism goes way beyond that. Because on the hotbed of social networks, which is the phenomenon of the era, the lowest common denominator of human beings, which is fear and hate, comes up with the enormous dirt of humanity that comes up with no limits and boundaries. And you see phenomena that we haven't noticed or seen in recent generations. It's not that we haven't seen horrific phenomena throughout humanity, especially the Holocaust. But we thought that it may be over because there's a new world order. And that somewhere has changed. And with this, the first objective that always is being touched upon is hating the Jews. So here we have a cocktail of extreme right, fascists of the worst kind, and extreme left, Israel haters and bashers of the BDS movement, together each one serving their respective political camps or bases in order to gain more support, first and foremost by attacking Jews, coupled with extreme Islam, which has lurked and entered many quarters in the Western world, which carries on the message of hating Jews, which was always there, by the way, by extreme Islam, also in Arab countries, and they were the proponents of the infamous resolution equating Zionism with racism, and classic anti-Semitism, which is there in many places. This is an explosive cocktail which leads to a very dangerous scene that we are seeing all over the world. I mean, every day there is another event. So much so that we will become indifferent. Another tombstone, another landmark marking the Holocaust, schools, Jewish schools being threatened, social network campaigns against Jews, statements by leaders against Jews, a pilot who refuses to shake hands of Israelis saying, I will never shake the hand of Jews whilst landing in Ben Gurion Airport, or Israeli children in Switzerland who went to a competition on science and one of the doors had a swastika on. So these are events, of course, that call for a common, forceful action. First of all, I want to commend the EU for taking some forceful action. I think the definition of anti-Semitism as defined by the IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, is a very, very important legal step. But legal means a defensive step, not a proactive step. Legal means, of course, trying to create a certain social order that will prevent some events from taking place. And now, of course, the challenge is how do we make sure that nation states, not only Europe, adopt this definition and implement it within their legal systems so that the legal system can both deter and adjudicate on against anti-Semitism. But the other frontier is, of course, proactive, is educating human beings as to the horrific consequences of anti-Semitism and why anti-Semitism is not allowed. And this is much more complicated because in brainwashing atmospheres on social networks, people are prone to being influenced. And they don't even know why, actually. They don't. They just don't. Not necessarily that they understand what's good or not good, what's bad or what's wrong. It just becomes part of their language or the way for themselves to express their enormous frustration against other social phenomena or economic phenomena or phenomena as such, or even a juvenile rebellion. But since this must be prohibited and acted against forcefully, it requires a major onslaught campaign of education in everybody, each one's country, educating why anti-Semitism is forbidden, educating about the Jews and about the Jewish religion and respecting Jews, and finally, of course, educating about the lessons of the Holocaust, which are not taught enough. We in Israel, we are so much influenced by the Holocaust as part and parcel of our being that we think that the whole world knows. But when you test it around in Europe and other countries, you see that people don't know, especially young kids whose attention span goes to other places, and it's just another story in what they read in history textbooks. This is the challenge which we need to meet together. The Jewish Agency of Israel is the largest Jewish organization in the world. We cooperate with many institutions and organizations all throughout the world and governments to deal with this challenge. I believe that strong cooperation with the European Union, as we've met some of us together in various events in recent months dealing with the story of anti-Semitism, calls for joint action together with the Israeli government, relative governments and other institutions all over the world to combat anti-Semitism together by various means of educating and promoting the understanding of this enormous risk and very negative development. I thank you all very much for taking part in this very important deliberation. I hope the conclusions will meet the challenges. Thank you very much.